You'll never really be one of us, Brianna. Eleanor's words hung in the air, thick as the smell of roasting turkey in her perfectly appointed Winnetka kitchen. My stomach dropped. Around us, Jake's boisterous family laughed, oblivious or worse, complicit. My hands trembled beneath the floral tablecloth. Inside, I was screaming. Outside, I remained composed. It had been a constant hum of dismissal since the wedding. Gifts returned, holidays unacknowledged, each a tiny cut. The Sedona trip, a meticulously planned peace offering, felt like my last shot. News buzzed on my phone. Sterling Ventures landed the Peterson account. Ever feel invisible? Like your best efforts never matter? Hit subscribe because things are about to get real. Watch Eleanor's face when she realizes who she's been messing with. You won't want to miss this. Thanksgiving, 2021. Eleanor's statement was the latest in a long line of dismissals. Earlier that year, during Jake's birthday, I'd painstakingly restored his grandfather's vintage watch, a family heirloom Eleanor deemed too old-fashioned. She instead presented him with a generic smartwatch, a gesture that felt deliberately dismissive of my efforts. The watch went unworn, gathering dust in a drawer. Christmas brought another sting. I'd secured tickets to Hamilton, Jake's favorite musical, only to find out Eleanor had already booked a ski trip for the family, excluding me. "It's a family tradition, dear," she'd purred, her eyes glinting with a strange satisfaction. While they carved down snowy slopes, I wrapped presents alone in our small apartment, the city lights feeling cold and distant. It felt like a silent competition when I couldn't win. But the final straw wasn't a holiday or a gift. It was an offhand comment during a casual dinner at their club. Eleanor, swirling her wine, said, "Jake, darling, you deserve someone who understands the family business." The words landed like a slap. The implication hung in the air. My work, my life, meant nothing. It was an attack on my very identity. I smiled politely, excusing myself to the restroom. Tears stung my eyes. I looked in the mirror, no longer seeing a daughter, a wife, a friend, but a pawn in Eleanor's game. I needed a new strategy. Back in Chicago, the cramped apartment felt even smaller, the chipped paint more glaring. The city, once a beacon of opportunity, now seemed to echo Eleanor's condescension. Each bill added to the stress of pretending we couldn't afford a down payment on a house, a feat I could have accomplished if it wasn't for my hidden savings. The constant charade, the forced smiles, it was suffocating. I vowed to change things. Then came the breakthrough. Sterling Ventures landed a major contract with GreenTech Innovations. The deal, initially projected to generate a modest profit, skyrocketed beyond expectations after my team implemented an innovative marketing strategy. I watched, from the sidelines, as the revenue poured in. No fanfare, no boasting, no outward sign of success, just a quiet satisfaction that grew with each passing month. I invested strategically, diversifying into real estate and tech startups, building a financial wall brick by brick. It wasn't about buying extravagant things. It was about securing my future. A year later, Sterling Ventures received an industry award. Picture it, the black tie gala, the flashing cameras, the presenter gushing about visionary leadership. I accepted the award with a calm smile, thanking my team, subtly highlighting the impact of our work. Jake beamed with pride. But as I scanned the crowd, I saw only absence. No Eleanor, no Troy, no Kyle, no acknowledgement. The contrast was stark, public acclaim, private dismissal. It fueled my resolve. I would build an empire they couldn't ignore, not for their approval but for my own peace. The moment of potential revelation arrived unexpectedly at Jake's birthday party. Troy, emboldened by too much scotch, cornered me. "So, Brianna," he slurred, "still playing at being a consultant. When are you going to find a real job?" My blood ran cold. I took a deep breath, focusing on the ice clinking in my glass. I could tell him, I could unleash the truth, but I didn't, not yet. Instead, I smiled sweetly and said, "Oh, Troy, you'd be surprised." I walked away, leaving him sputtering, the weight of my silence more powerful than any words I could have spoken. 2 years passed. Another Thanksgiving. The invitation, delivered via Jake, felt like a summons, not an invitation. My fingers tightened around the linen napkin at our own small table. I wasn't going to play small anymore. This year I was prepared. I strategically upgraded my wardrobe, trading subtle designer pieces for understated power suits. My hair, once styled in soft waves, was now pulled back in a sleek, confident bun. The difference was subtle but significant. The shift from tolerated guest to silent power broker was complete. The air in Eleanor's living room was thick with forced cheer. The aroma of pumpkin pie mingled with the faint scent of resentment. Troy and Kyle offered curt nods, their eyes flicking over me with a mixture of curiosity and suspicion. Eleanor, ever the matriarch, greeted me with a tight smile. "Brianna, so glad you could make it." As I watched, Eleanor's gaze narrowed as her eyes took in my watch, a stainless steel Rolex Daytona. Its value was not in its price, but in the fact that it had been a gift to myself for closing a particularly difficult deal. A subtle, silent declaration of independence. The significance was not lost. Later, over dessert, Eleanor launched into a familiar monologue about Jake's cousin's recent promotion. Her tone was deliberately condescending, a subtle reminder of my perceived lack of status. I took a slow sip of wine, a hint of a smile playing on my lips. Then a phone buzzed, not hers, mine. The ringtone I assigned to my head of legal cut through the noise. "Excuse me," I said, rising gracefully. As I moved to the hallway, I heard Troy's voice, laced with sarcasm. "Important business, Brianna." I ignored him. The call was staged, a calculated move. "Confirm the acquisition," I said, my voice clear and confident. "All terms accepted, send the release." I hung up. The silence that followed was palpable. A tremor of unease rippled through the room. The hunter had become the hunted. The game had just begun. Returning to the dining room, I caught Eleanor's eye. A spark of something unfamiliar flickered within it. Apprehension. "Everything all right, dear?" she asked, her voice a touch too sweet. "Perfectly," I replied, my voice calm and steady. "Sterling Ventures just finalized the acquisition of Oakhaven Media." A stunned silence descended. Oakhaven Media, the Oakhaven Media. It was a Chicago institution, a media conglomerate worth hundreds of millions. Troy choked on his wine. Kyle's jaw dropped. Jake stared at me, bewildered. Eleanor's carefully constructed facade crumbled. Her face paled and her hand trembled as she reached for her water glass. What are you saying?" she stammered. I met her gaze, unflinching. "I'm saying, Eleanor, that my little consultancy now owns Oakhaven Media, including your favorite news channel." The revelation hung in the air, heavy and undeniable. Troy's face was flushed, his eyes darting between me and his mother. Kyle, ever the opportunist, tried to recover, forcing a weak smile. "Well, that's wonderful, Brianna." But it was Eleanor's reaction that truly mattered. Her eyes narrowed, a mixture of disbelief and fury warring within them. She had underestimated me, she had dismissed me, and now her world was tilting on its axis. The power had shifted, the game had changed. The dessert fork clattered against her plate as she placed it on the table. I smiled, a genuine smile this time. "Yes, Eleanor," I said softly. "It is." "So, Brianna," Troy began, recovering quickly. Perhaps you could find a spot for me at Oakhaven. I've always been interested in media." Kyle chimed in, "Me too, I've got some great ideas." I raised an eyebrow, maintaining eye contact with Eleanor. "Funny," I said, my voice dripping with sarcasm. "I don't recall anyone in this family ever being interested in my work before." Silence. Then Eleanor, ever the strategist, spoke. "Brianna dear, this is wonderful news for the family. We should celebrate. How about you invest in Jake's brother's latest venture? It's a ground floor opportunity." My silence stretched, amplifying the discomfort in the room. They were scrambling, trying to regain their footing. Jake looked at me expectantly, a flicker of hope in his eyes. "I'll consider it," I said finally, "after I review their business plan thoroughly." I watched as their faces fell. They laughed then, they are not laughing now. "And about that Sedona trip, Eleanor," I continued, turning my attention back to her. "I've canceled your reservation. The resort is lovely, I'm sure, but I'm not running a charity." I paused, letting the words sink in. "Consider it a donation to my real family, the friends who actually appreciate me." Later, as Jake and I drove home, he was uncharacteristically quiet. Finally he spoke. "Brianna, why didn't you tell me? About Sterling Ventures, about everything." I sighed, keeping my eyes on the road. "Because I wanted you to love me for me, Jake, not for my money. And frankly, I wasn't sure you'd understand." A tense silence filled the car. The streetlights of Winnetka blurred past the window, each one a judgment. Jake was grappling with a new reality, one where his wife wasn't just successful, but a force to be reckoned with. I needed him to understand that my silence wasn't about deception but protection. "Understand?" Jake finally said, his voice tight. "Brianna, my mother just tried to manipulate you into investing in my brother's failing business. And you own Oakhaven Media. This is insane. He ran a hand through his hair, visibly shaken. It was the reaction I'd both anticipated and dreaded. Remember that building downtown you were looking at? I asked softly, changing the subject. The car ride was too quiet. He turned towards me, confused. The one we thought was out of our reach. Yeah, he said slowly. The Miller Building, what about it? Sterling Ventures bought it last quarter. Jake stared at me, speechless. The Miller Building wasn't just any building. It was prime real estate, a symbol of success and power in Chicago. He blinked rapidly, trying to process the information. You bought the Miller Building, without telling me, I nodded. It was a strategic investment. And, I added, a hint of steel in my voice, Oakhaven Media's new headquarters are moving there next month. Eleanor's favorite news channel will be broadcasting from my building. The irony was exquisite. The silence returned, but this time it was different. It wasn't the silence of confusion, but of dawning realization. Jake was beginning to see the scope of my plan, the depth of my control. He saw the potential consequences for his family. But, why? He asked, his voice barely a whisper. Why go to all this trouble? Why not just tell them? Tell me. I pulled the car over to the side of the road, the engine idling softly. I turned to face him, my expression serious. Because, Jake, I needed to know that you would choose me, even when your family couldn't. My hand rested on his arm. I needed to be strong enough to protect myself and us. And, I paused, there's one more thing. Jake tensed, bracing himself for another revelation. This was it. Remember that family business Eleanor was always talking about? I asked, watching his eyes. The one she said I wouldn't understand. He nodded, his brow furrowed. It's called Winnetka Investments, and it's been hemorrhaging money for years. They're leveraged to the hilt, relying on Oakhaven Media's advertising revenue to stay afloat. Do you know where I am going with this? Remember a few months ago when you asked if I could help them? He gasped softly. I continued, as the new owner of Oakhaven Media, I control their advertising budget, which means I control their lifeline. His eyes widened in horror. You mean, you could bankrupt them? My voice was calm, measured. I have no intention of doing that. But I do intend to use my leverage to ensure that they treat me, and you, with the respect we deserve. Eleanor wanted a business partner, I guess she has one now. The look on Jake's face was a mixture of shock, awe, and a hint of fear. He finally understood. The Sedona trip was never about acceptance. It was about exposing their true colors, revealing their vulnerabilities. I had played the long game, and I had won. Months dissolved into a new normal. Initial calls from Eleanor and Troy were met with polite but firm refusals. Kyle attempted a business proposition, swiftly shut down. While they sought reconciliation for self-serving reasons, my life blossomed. The cramped apartment was exchanged for a sun-drenched condo overlooking Lake Michigan. Sterling Ventures thrived, attracting talent and expanding its reach. The constant ache for acceptance faded, replaced by a quiet confidence. Looking back, the need for their validation had been a cage. Free from it, I built a life of genuine connection and purpose. The fear of judgment was replaced with a steely resolve. Winnetka remained their world, ours was limitless. Power resided not in inherited status but in self-defined worth. Ultimately, self-respect became the greatest revenge. Feels good, right? Claim your power. If Eleanor reminds you of someone, share this. Success is sweeter than any revenge. Now build your empire. Self-respect wins.